Hello, Master Gidu. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. Nigerians demand a reversal of government policies following 1 year of bold but unpopular economic reforms. We'll have a report from Abuja. Donald Trump, the first convicted felon to run for U.S. president, returns to the campaign trail. In the Indian Ocean island of Mayotte battles a severe cholera outbreak, stretching its care capabilities to the limit. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin our broadcast in West Africa, where Nigeria's main labor unions on Tuesday is suspending an indefinite strike for at least 1 week in order to continue negotiations with the government over a new minimum wage after reforms caused inflation to spike, deepening a cost of living crisis. Nigeria's two biggest union federations, the Nigerian Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress, shut down the national grid and disrupted flights across the country Monday as they began an indefinite strike over the government's failure to agree to a new minimum wage. Unions and the government met late on Monday for talks where the government says it was open to a higher monthly minimum wage than the amount of 60,000 naira or $41 it had proposed. Nigeria is experiencing its worst economic crisis in a generation, leading to widespread hardship and anger. Some Nigerians are demanding a reversal of government policies 1 year after authorities embarked on bold but unpopular economic reforms. President Bola Tinubu is refusing to change course, insisting his reforms will improve the country's ailing economy. Timothy Obiezu reports from Abuja.
This was how it all began on May 29, 2023, as Bola Tinubu was inaugurated as the 16th president of Africa's most populous nation. Under the campaign Renewed Hope, the so-called political godfather of Lagos promised economic growth, security, job creation, food security, and inclusive leadership. But 1 year later, many Nigerians who supported him, like trader Jolly Guinea Kanwa, say his approach is flawed.
That we are suffering. Tinubu should do something. Tinubu should do something. At least he's a human being. He's a human being. He's the one ruling this country. He did not come to destroy this country, but to take care of the people that is ruling. To take care of us. We are suffering. Children are crying. Adults are crying.
President Tinubu introduced controversial policies, including the scrapping of decades-long fuel subsidy payments and floating the naira against other world currencies shortly after taking office. Transportation and food prices have soared, leading to an annual inflation rate of 34%. Tinubu has assured Nigerians he'll fix inflation and address the economic challenges. This week, the president announced free train rides for 6 months as he opened a new metro station in Abuja to mark his first year in office. The president also announced the launch of several development projects, but critics say the government is irresponsible and pandering to foreign influence.
It was extremely and fundamentally flawed to stay at the swearing-in ceremony to announce that subsidy is gone, when you had no ministers, no advisors, nobody to talk to. Because before you should announce that policy, there should have been some people sitting down in a committee or in a group or whatever you call them, do the simulations and the projections.
Nigeria's security situation is also getting worse under Tinubu. According to Beacon Security Consulting Limited, the number of terrorist and criminal attacks in the last year increased to nearly 8,000 compared to 5,500 recorded the year before. Onyebere says lack of accountability is the reason the security problems have persisted.
Politics is still being trumping governance, especially in security. How many of these bandits have been captured, tried, prosecuted, and sentenced for people to see?
Nigerian workers' unions are threatening to protest if the president does not reverse his policies on fuel subsidies and the currency by the end of May. Many here say they will continue to remind the president of his campaign promises to make the country more secure and prosperous. Timothy Obiezu, VOA News, Abuja, Nigeria.
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol says the country is stepping up cooperation with African nations to secure a stable supply of critical minerals and speed up negotiations to promote economic partnerships and trade. Hosting its first ever summit with the leaders of 48 African countries, President Yoon says South Korea is increasing its development aid for Africa to $10 billion over the next 6 years as it looks to tap into the continent's rich mineral resources and potential as a vast export market. Yoon is also pledging to offer $14 billion in export financing to promote trade and investment for South Korean companies in African countries.
We will seek sustainable ways to work together on issues directly related to future growth, such as stable supplies of key minerals and digital transformation.
President Yoon and the chair of the African Union, Mauritania's President Mohamed Ould Ghazouani, are to issue a joint statement. For more on the South Korea-Africa Summit, I'm joined by Young Jung Cho, a VOA Korean reporter. Young Jung, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
Number one, what's the perception of South Korea regarding this summit?
Well, South Korea hopes to expand its horizon of diplomacy and trade through the summit with some 48 African leaders. President Yoon Suk-yeol's goal is to make South Korea a country of global pivotal state, meaning that South Korea wants to cooperate with more countries around the world and to take on more global leadership. Now, South Korea thinks it's a little bit belated that South Korea is focusing on Africa compared to China and European countries, which already heavily focused on Africa. South Korea wants to boost a trade with African nations, especially in terms of critical minerals.
And when it comes to commodities from Africa, what is really in high demand from South Korea?
Well, South Korea's presidential office said that it is very important to boost critical mineral cooperation with Africa, which accounts for 30% of the global critical mineral resources, especially including chrome, cobalt, and manganese. Now, South Korea imported last year about 95% of industrial minerals from overseas and heavily reliant on China. So diversifying the source to Africa is very important to South Korea.
Now, the other question maybe a lot of Africans are asking is whether South Korea is seeking the African heads of states to get involved in, politically and take South Korea's side in terms of relations when it comes to the conflict we see and hear between South Korea and North Korea.
Well, this is a very sensitive issue because North Korea already has strong relations and historical relations with many African countries. But South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol was very explicit. He told the leaders of Africa that African leaders should take more firm stance against North Korea's provocations. Now, African nations take about 55 countries, account for more than a quarter of 193 UN member states. And that's a lot of vote in United Nations. When North Korea does any provocations, South Korea wants to have resolutions to punish North Korea, and African votes can be very critical in that effort.
So maybe perhaps to wind up here, tell me what South Koreans like to do or see when they go to Africa.
Oh, South Koreans love the nature of Africa and all the animals and the rich culture that they have, the music and the liveliness. And also, I think South Koreans really admire the African athletes. They really excel in global stage.
Wow, Yoo Jung, wonderfully said. Thank you so much. Yoo Jung Cho is a reporter with VOA's Korean service. Now, South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol says the continent is a crucial partner for South Korea to further its industrial advances and cooperation with Africa, and not a choice but a necessity. For more on this summit, I'm joined by Professor Kwaku Nwama, at the School of International Service at American University. Professor Nuama, welcome to Africa 54 again. Do you think this summit translates into South Korea opening up its market to African trade?
Well, thanks for having me, Esther. So the summit doesn't necessarily mean that markets are going to be open. For markets to be open, Africa has to have something to export, and we're not there yet. Africa accounts for just about 2% of South Korea's global trade. But there's room for improvement because Africa has a lot that South Korea needs. Africa's markets are growing. There's 1.4 billion people on the continent now. By 2050, 25% of people on the planet will be in Africa. So that's a growing market, and we have all the critical minerals that South Korea is going to need in order to compete with the likes of China and Japan and the United States and India. And so there's room for improvement.
Professor, when U.S. President Joe Biden invited African heads of state to come for the U.S.-Africa summit, there was a lot of concern about the agenda as a continent. Now, with South Korea, should the current head of the African Union, Ghazouanami, present a common agenda for Africa in terms of trade relations with South Korea?
It's hard to produce a common agenda that speaks to everybody's needs, but there's stuff that we can agree on. So, for example, some of what has already been decided in terms of aid or in terms of support for South Korean businesses willing to invest in Africa. Those things are important. You can also throw in things like security cooperation and general stuff. But the real things will be done in the bilateral sessions where individual African countries will make demands. And I think Africans should come to these meetings with a shopping list of things that they want. So, for example, South Korea wants critical minerals in Africa. Africans should demand something. They should demand support for import substitution industrialization programs. South Korea shouldn't just export cars to Africa. It should build those cars in Africa, as it does in the United States. We want scholarships for our students to go and study over there. We want technology transfer. We should make these demands. And so you're going to have the generic, watered-down communiques that are signed, but those things don't really mean much. In the bilateral sessions, African leaders should demand the things that they need for their countries.
Now, Professor, at the present time, what we know is that Korean Air flies to Nairobi, Cairo, Tripoli, and Johannesburg. But does South Korea need to kind of create or develop connections and network so that they can have direct flights straight to the African countries from Seoul in order to realize the promises being made at this very first summit between South Korea and Africa?
Well, those will be token manifestations of the relationship. What really matters is growing trade and the commitment. When those things happen, these communications will occur. You don't want South Korean planes flying to African headquarters so African elites can go on vacation. That doesn't help anybody. We want genuine economic relationships, mutual respect. And then African Airlines should also take advantage of this relationship. So there's no reason why Ethiopian Airlines shouldn't be flying to Seoul, for example. So this is a growing area, but we should demand real commitment to support and change, not token things like pretty much just having planes flying in there. Nobody's going to these places because the trade is very little at the moment.
And Professor, quickly, when you talk about those commitments, what kind of trade are we talking about here? Do you think about something like South Korea should help develop certain, infrastructure to be able to facilitate this kind of business?
Yes, so infrastructure is very important. We also want them to process things, help us process things before they import them. So, for example, African countries like Zimbabwe has a large lithium deposit. They've passed a law saying that you can export the lithium raw. And so if South Korea wants lithium from Zimbabwe, they have to help set up the factories there to process them before they import. But more importantly, they sell a lot of electronics and cars in Africa. We want to see factories in those places. Help us develop local supply chains that will help our people find jobs rather than simply dumping goods on the markets.
Very well said, Professor Kwaku Nuama at the School of International Service at American University. We appreciate your insight. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump returns to campaigning this week as the first convicted felon to run for U.S. president as a major party candidate. VOA correspondent Scott Stearns looks at how voters are reacting to the verdict on the campaign trail.
Donald Trump supporters continued to cheer their candidate outside New York's Trump Tower, a day after the former president was convicted of 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in a scheme to illegally influence the results of his 2016 election. In the city's Chelsea neighborhood, voter Nicholas Warner says the conviction was horrible and the country needs a second Trump term.
When he was in office for 4 years, we had nothing like we have going on now with the war and everything else, or the the economy and inflation. So I just would like him to come back so we can just take care of business like a businessman and get this country where it's got to go.
In Maryland, voter Arkady Lapidus says Trump's claim that his trial was rigged is not good for the Republican Party or for the country.
There is nothing until this party dumps Donald Trump, says we believe in elections, we believe in the courts, we believe in juries who hand down verdicts because they're our fellow Americans. Until the party wholesale espouses American values as I see them, I will never vote Republican again.
Voter Margaret Barnes says that even with a felony conviction, Trump is more believable than Joe Biden.
Biden just strikes me as being fake, and he's just fake sentimentality, just telling stories as if he's this nice old man when, it's just artificial. I don't believe him. It's insincere. And with Trump, he's bombastic, and he's in that world of gold toilets and champagne and caviar and golf courses and Saudi princes. But even though what he says can be offensive, I believe him a lot more.
In Colorado, voter Luda Golodnik says Trump's conviction is deserved, and she hopes it hurts his campaign.
The way that he speaks about women, the way that he treats other countries, the way that he talks about illegal immigrants, him being married to an immigrant also, it just I think he needs to. He's had what he's had coming a long way.
In Nevada, voter Keith Dayton says the verdict has no impact on his vote.
I'm still voting for Donald Trump. I think this whole thing has been a mockery. I'm embarrassed for our country. I wouldn't have him over for a beer or go to the pub with him. But that's not what it's about.
In the electoral swing state of Pennsylvania, the verdict may boost Trump supporters, says voter Jeffrey Nesbitt.
I think it will be much more effective for the American people to just beat him and his movement at the polls. I think that there's a good possibility that this verdict may motivate his movement to come out and vote even more aggressively and act more aggressively in this upcoming election.
90% of registered Republicans still back Trump, according to a Reuters Ipsos poll. That remaining 10% of Republicans, now less likely to vote for Trump, could make a difference in a close election where both candidates need to hold their bases and win independent voters. Scott Stearns, VOA News.
Opening statements in Hunter Biden's federal firearms case have been completed in the eastern U.S. state of Delaware. The son of President Joe Biden has been charged with lying on federal gun purchase forms when he said he wasn't a drug addict. Dr. Shannon O'Brien, author and associate professor of instruction at the University of Texas, told VOA's Kim Lewis she is surprised at the level of scrutiny in the case.
Usually most of these types of gun cases where you get caught with guns like this are usually slam dunk cases. This would probably be a case that would have some sort of just, plea deal cut and would then, just allocute to the charges and be sentenced. I think the level of this is because the Republicans are desperate to have something to charge Joe Biden with. I think they're going to ultimately also stumble because, to a degree, I think this play might ultimately stumble because we're all children of parents who, many of them are still in the workforce.
Dr. O'Brien says Hunter Biden's trial and another set for September on failing to pay $1.4 million in taxes will have an effect on President Biden's campaign, but she is not quite sure to what degree. Hunter Biden has pleaded not guilty to gun charges. Let us know what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, Outbreaks of cholera threaten parts of Africa. We'll be right back.
This week on Straight Talk Africa, South Africa's ruling African National Congress Party lost its majority in last week's elections for the first time in 30 years. Now it has to form a coalition government with another party in order to govern. What does this mean for the future of the country and its people? Join me, Vincent Makori, for an in-depth discussion on what's next for South Africa.
Did you know that Africa has the highest rate of suicide? And although men are more likely to commit suicide, the rate for women has risen significantly over the past several years, according to the World Health Organization. This week in Our Voices, we'll try to understand why suicide is on the rise and learn what role we can play to prevent it. Join the conversation each week right here on Our Voices.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain, and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depends on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
In other news, Somali National Security Advisor Hussein Sheikh Ali says he expects all Ethiopian troops to leave Somalia by the end of 2024 as the African Union Transition Mission mandate expires in December. Ali's comments come amid concerns from Somali regional officials who say the absence of Ethiopian troops could benefit al-Shabaab militants. Zimbabwean authorities are urging citizens to cycle to work ostensibly for health reasons and to promote a clean environment, as bicycles do not use fossil fuels, but also to cope with a broken public transit system, poor road conditions, fuel shortages, and low salaries. And Britain intends to begin deporting asylum seekers to Rwanda on July 24th, according to a government lawyer. The fiercely debated plan is dependent on Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's Conservative Party winning the upcoming election. Sending asylum seekers who have arrived in Britain without permission to Rwanda is one of Sunak's flagship policies. It's time for a health report. And joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with the latest on global life expectancy. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. Get this. A study by the World Health Organization reveals that COVID-19 cut global life expectancy by almost 2 years when it occurred from 2019 to 2021, wiping out a decade of progress. Published in the medical journal The Lancet, the research states the amount of time the average person can expect to live in good health fell 1.5 years to 61.9 years in 2021, the same level as in 2012. The Americas and Southeast Asia were the worst hit regions, with life expectancy falling by about 3 years. The Western Pacific was the least hit, with life expectancy falling just 0.1 year. Severe outbreaks of cholera are threatening parts of Africa. Health authorities, scientists, and aid agencies say the unprecedented surge of the waterborne bacterial infection in Africa is the newest example of how tropical storms, floods, and drought partly drives disease outbreaks. In Southern and East Africa, more than 6,000 people have died and nearly 350,000 cases of cholera have been reported since a new series of outbreaks began in late 2021, according to the WHO. Malawi and Zambia have experienced the worst outbreaks in recent months. Mozambique, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia are also badly affected. Zimbabwe has seen cases rise as the country wrestles with severe droughts and people rely on less safe water sources.
We got vaccinated, but we are still afraid of contracting cholera again because nothing has changed. We don't have safe, clean water, and sewage is still flowing everywhere. The situation remains the same.
I think these programs should continue, not because of the cholera pandemic, but it should be done like when we have any other disease that is an outbreak, we come on board, we sensitize in order to, reduce the numbers.
Now, a French island in the Indian Ocean, Mayotte, is battling a cholera outbreak, and it's stretching its care capabilities to the limit. VOA's Jackson Vungani has more.
85 cases of cholera have been reported in Mayotte since the first case on March the 18th, according to the Public Health Agency. Most cases have been detected in the commune of Kungu, in an underprivileged neighborhood with difficulties accessing potable water and sanitation issues, reports Santé Publique France.
Today, the situation is a few cases in Msangamogi. The only thing we can say so far is that there is a strong link to the river where people wash their clothes. We are clearly waiting for the conclusions from Santé Publique France.
The Kungu Town Hall issued an order on Wednesday to temporarily close all schools in 2 villages until May the 18th. A health protocol includes disinfecting the patient's home, identifying and treating contact cases, and progressively expanding ring vaccination.
I now know what to do to avoid catching the disease. When coming home, you must wash your hands with soap before eating.
According to Santé Publique France, as of May the 13th, 4,456 contacts have been vaccinated on the island. A new recruitment campaign is underway to replace the voluntary personnel managed by SPF, whose mission is ending.
At the same time, we are raising awareness directly within the community about what cholera is, how it is transmitted, and the measures to take when there is a case in the household. We also distribute water purification tablets to families who unfortunately have no choice but to go to the river to wash clothes or in some cases to drink water.
The first cholera cases in Mayotte were recorded in mid-March among people returning from the neighboring Comoros, where the epidemic is peaking. The first cases in patients who had not left the island appeared at the end of April.
And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on X at Linor Mudu. Back to you, Esther.
Thanks, Lino. Be sure to watch Lino Mudu's health reports every Tuesday right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.